Ever wonder why would someone leave everything they've ever known? Their homeland, their language, their culture, and their ancestors' graves. Why would millions of Europeans board overcrowded wooden ships, cross a violent Atlantic Ocean and gamble their future on a distant frozen land called Canada? Today we are diving deep into one of the most transformative movements in human history, the waves of European migration to Canada, and specifically to Alberta. This is not a simple story of adventure, it's a story of desperation, of opportunity, of war, of faith, of land, of empire, and of course, survival. And it's also a story that shaped modern Canada. Now, long before Canada was a country, it was territory contested by European empires. French arrived first in large numbers in the 1600s. Traders, missionaries, settlers establishing New France along the St. Lawrence River. Then came the British. These early Europeans didn't leave primarily because they hated Europe. They came because empires expanded, because land meant power, because fur meant wealth. They traveled by wooden sailing ships, taking 6 to 12 weeks across the Atlantic. Many died from disease before even arriving these shores. When they reached North America, survival was not guaranteed. Winters were brutal, crops failed, supplies ran thin. They relied heavily on indigenous nations for survival knowledge, for trade alliances, food preservation, winter clothing, and transportation routes. Relationships were complex. Cooperation, intermarriages, economic partnership, but also conflict, displacement, and treaty making as colonial control expanded. Now we move to the biggest wave between the early 1800s and World War I. Millions of Europeans left their homelands. Why? Because Europe was in crisis, overpopulation and land shortages in Ireland, in Scotland, in Germany, and in Eastern Europe. Recall political revolutions across Europe in 1848, religious persecution, industrialization pushing peasants off rural lands, poverty and rigid class system with no upward mobility. Canada, meanwhile, was advertising opportunity. The government aggressively promoted settlement in the West, especially after Confederation in 1867 and the completion of the Canada Pacific Railway in 1885. Free or nearly free farmland was offered through the Dominion Lands Act, and Alberta became a magnet. The journey was grueling, weeks crossing the Atlantic in steerage-cramped lower deck of ships, arriving in Quebec City or Halifax, long rail journeys west, finally stepping into open prairie, often nothing but grasslands and skies. Many arrived with little money, limited English and farming tools, but they were promised land, 160 acres for small registration fees if they farmed it for 3 years. Ukrainians settled in east-central Alberta. Germans and Mennonites built farming communities. Scandinavians moved into central and northern Alberta. British settlers often moved into administrative and urban roles. They built sod houses. They survived prairie winters. They faced crop failures, isolation, and economic depression. But many endured because land ownership meant something they never had in Europe: independence. As Europeans and later settlers moved westwards, indigenous nations were already living there: Cree, Blackfoot, Dene, Métis, and others. Through the 1870s, the Canadian government negotiated the numbered treaties, including Treaties 6, 7, and 8, in what is now Alberta. These treaties were meant to allow peaceful settlement in exchange for promises of land rights, aid, and coexistence. But the interpretation and implementation of these treaties remain deeply contested till this day. There were moments of cooperation and trade. There were also moments of conflict, most notably the Northwest Resistance of 1885. European settlement reshaped the demographic and political landscape of Alberta permanently. After World War I and World War II, another wave came. War refugees, displaced persons, Italians, Dutch, Poles, Hungarians. They came not just for land but for stability. Europe had been devastated by mechanized warfare. Economies collapsed. Borders shifted. Canada offered reconstruction, work, and safety. Many settled in cities like Edmonton and Calgary, contributing to construction, oil development, and manufacturing. European migration dominated Canada's early demographic makeup, largely because immigration policies favored Europeans. Asian immigration, Chinese railway workers, Japanese fishermen, South Asian laborers faced severe restrictions, like the Chinese head tax and exclusion laws. Africans and Caribbean immigration expanded significantly only after policy reforms in the late 1960s. Now, unlike early European settlers who were often offered land grants, Many later immigrants arrived through skilled worker program, family sponsorship, or refugee pathways. The policy framework changed dramatically after 1967 when Canada introduced a point-based immigration system. The early European waves were largely agricultural and colonial. Later, immigration became urban, skilled, and globally diverse. Over a generation, European settlers built farming communities, churches and schools, towns and rail hubs, oil and gas industries and political institutions. They intermarried across European ethnic lines. They developed hybrid prairie identities. They gradually became what we now call Canadian. Their language blended, their food blended, their cultures blended, and Alberta became one of the most European-influenced provinces in Canada, particularly of British, Ukrainian, German, and Scandinavian descent. So why did Europeans leave Europe? Because they were pushed by poverty, war, land shortages, famine, and rigid class systems. And they were pulled by land, opportunity, empire expansion, and the promise of ownership and autonomy. They endured storms at sea. They survived prairie winters. They negotiated and conflicted with indigenous nations. They built farms, towns, industries, and over time, they became part of the foundation of modern Canada. But Canada didn't stop evolving there. Later waves of immigrants from Asia, Africa, Caribbeans, and Latin America reshaped the country again, expanding what it means to be Canadian. Understanding this early European migration isn't about nostalgia. It's about contexts. It's about recognizing how and why this country was built and how every wave of newcomers in different ways has shaped the Canada we know today. And Alberta stands as one of the clearest examples of that transformation. Feel free to drop your comments, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.